for being here this morning, everybody. This morning offers a pre-budget recap of what has actually happened with the state of Ontario's finances since the last budget was first presented in May of 2014. Experts continue to express skepticism about the Liberal government's fiscal plan, and more specifically, they claim their claim that they'll balance by 2017-18. So it started immediately after the budget was presented when Moody's debt rating agency changed their outlook from stable to negative, expressing their concerns over the government's ability to eliminate the deficit in 3 years. Maclean's magazine called the budget a unicorn budget. The Conference Board of Canada said Ontario can't meet its pledge to balance the books by 2017-18 without spending cuts or tax hikes. The Ontario Chamber of Commerce titled their report on Ontario's debt and deficit, "How Bad Is It?" The title alone should give an indication that, quite frankly, it's bad. They actually go on to say, quote, "Ontario's fiscal situation is becoming increasingly dire. We are likely to reach a state of crisis unless the province cuts spending and changes the way it does business." The Canadian Federation of Independent Business pipes in by declaring 97% of small businesses are concerned about the state of Ontario's economy. In fact, 67% are very concerned. The list goes on and on here. Fitch, just in past December, Fitch downgraded the province's credit rating to an AA-. They said the budget options are likely to prove more limited given the extent of actions taken to date and the use of one-time actions to achieve their targets. Here's why all this focus on debt and deficit is so very important. The Auditor General told us that, quote, "Ontario's debt continues to grow faster than the province's economy, which could have negative implication on the province's finances." That's very, very critical, that she summed up the whole year of all of the negativity provided by all of the other agencies. She concluded that the consequences of high debt include greater vulnerability to a rise in interest rates, a possible downgrading of the province's credit rating, which would lead to higher borrowing costs. But her biggest concern was what she called the crowding out of other spending. We now have less money for the things our citizens expect from their province. So shortly after the Auditor General expressed her concerns, Moody's warned Ontario about this debt burden, saying it will have more difficult time than Quebec achieving a balanced budget and paying down its deficit. And that brings us to today. The response to an order paper question I received from the Ministry of Finance has raised even more concerns about the Liberals' fiscal plan. It's highlighted in this issue of Focus on Finance. Yes, it's back. I knew you'd be excited to see this back again. This is a series of newsletters which highlight, among other things, how the Liberals say one thing in public, but internal documents continue to prove the opposite to be true. This edition highlights three main inconsistencies. Number one, well, the most alarming, perhaps, is the fact that the government still doesn't have a detailed line-by-line set of numbers for the 2017-18 budget. You can see in here, they're just left blank. This is supposed to show us how they balance the books. They show a made-up revenue number, they show a made-up expense number, but there's no line-by-line for either of them, and they magically add up to a zero, a balanced budget in 2017-18. Another area of concern is their misleading claims when it comes to the funding from the federal government. Again, they say one thing, but their own documents prove that exactly the opposite of this is true. A further example is this billion-dollar increase in what the government calls, quote, other tax revenue, but it doesn't have any plans on how to achieve that revenue. So we've posed three questions to the province. Number one, why is the government unable or unwilling to show its calculations to prove it can balance the budget by 2017-18? Secondly, where specifically is this more than $1 billion in other tax revenue expected to come from? Will it be from asset sales the government claims it's investing in transit and infrastructure? And thirdly and finally, why has the government misled Ontarians about the fact it has received an increase in money from the Government of Canada, where they consistently tell us they have less money? I will be sending a copy of this newsletter to the new Financial Accountability Office. I recently received a response from Mr. Leclerc to a letter I sent him, and he has indicated he will offer some preliminary comments on the government's projections after the budget is introduced, and there's a copy of the letter there. This is a government that has more than doubled our debt to $300 billion in the past decade. Their own internal documents have shown they're willing to mislead the public about the true impact and consequences of their fiscal incompetence, their waste, and their mismanagement. There's good reason for Ontarians to be skeptical and to ask, will the government really be balancing its budget in 2017-18, or will their mismanagement continue to, as the Auditor General called it, crowd out our spending on vital services? Thank you.
Vic, given that not that long ago there was an election fought over a lot of this stuff and you guys lost, do you think the public actually really cares all that much about whether they're hitting their deficit targets or not? I mean, this doesn't seem to be an issue that's necessarily resonating with people.
It resonates to the 500,000 who woke up this morning without a job. It resonates to the 300,000 who used to work in manufacturing that saw our manufacturing sector hollowed out. And it resonates to the Auditor General. It resonates to the Chamber of Commerce and all of their members. 97% of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business members are concerned with debt and deficit. It has resonated with the Conference Board of Canada, Moody's, Fitch, all of the debt rating agencies. So the Auditor General is the one that I use her line. In fact, in last year's Focus on Finance book that we published, the new one, by the way, is coming out before the budget. Just want you to be ready for that. She talks about crowding out. We talked about that as well. The vital services that you come to expect every day are starting to be crowded out. I'll use the examples. For instance, 39 fewer days of cataract surgeries. Diabetes testing strips have been cut. Physiotherapy for seniors is cut from 100 sessions in seniors' homes to 4. This is the crowding out that the Auditor General has spoken about. So it is becoming an issue, and my role as finance critic is to bring that issue to the forefront.
What's the public to think about your credibility when one of your own leadership candidates, Patrick Brown, says you guys, the caucus, is out of touch? So why should anybody listen to you? I mean, you have your own candidates saying you guys don't know what you're talking about.
I continue to bring the voice of the Auditor General, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, the Chambers of Commerce, Moody's, Fitch, all of the debt rating agencies. They're sounding an alarm bell in Ontario. And it's my role as as a finance critic for our party to continue to bring these things to the forefront. These are critical. This crowding out, as the Auditor General calls it, is starting to hurt every day, everybody's pocketbooks on a day-to-day basis. Every day, it's hurting us more and more.
What's sort of gotten us here, I think, is in large part a fair bit of new spending. We've also at the same time cut corporate taxes and not increased personal taxes. Is it time to sort of dramatically rethink all of those things if the state of the books is not sustainable?
Well, starting with Don Drummond, told us we need to dramatically rethink everything we're doing. Followed by all of the agencies that I've mentioned in the past. They all want to see spending cuts. They know that if you don't cut spending, you're going to end up increasing taxes. We saw it last year with tobacco taxes. We saw it with the aviation fuel taxes. All kinds of new taxes were added last year, and I got to be honest, I've never found one tax that has a new tax that has created a job. So I'm very concerned about that. I'm a fiscal conservative. I believe that lower taxes create jobs. It's just a core belief that I have, and I think that our party has as well. Take it in a bigger picture of what's really wrong in Ontario. We have the highest energy rates in North America. We have the highest payroll taxes in Canada. This is what's hurting. This is what's crowding out the job market. So it's a bigger fix that's needed. It's not just about cutting spending and addressing the taxes. It's about tackling the very core of what's wrong in Ontario, the highest energy rates. That's crippling businesses who are leaving. When I was energy critic for 2 years, I would get letters after letters. I would visit plants along the St. Lawrence Seaway who were getting letters from mayors across the river saying, why are you still in Ontario? Come here for cheap power. We need to fix that fundamental problem in Ontario or we're never going to get any better.
But do you maybe have a blind spot about corporate taxes, your party, in that it refuses to consider raising them, and yet corporations are now paying a far lower rate of tax than they were before? We haven't seen the great surge in jobs we were expecting, and we're the province is in a hole.
Well, could you imagine what it would be if we didn't lower the corporate taxes from 11.5 to 10, or from 14 to 11.5? You know, even our party believes that it should be in the 10% level, lowering them from 11.5% to 10%. We believe that corporate taxes, less red tape, lower affordable energy rates are the keys that are going to turn our economy around. You need to do it all. So you can't lay this at the feet of corporate taxes when you've got the highest energy rates in North America. That's what's crippling Ontario. Look at Xstrata Copper. I've used this example many times. We pay Quebec and the states $2.6 billion to take our surplus power, and Quebec turns around and lures Xstrata Copper, the single largest user of power in all of Ontario, out of Ontario and sells them the power that we paid them to take. 672 people lost their job in Timmins. That's exactly what the Auditor General told us that would happen. So this is it's a deeper structural problem and a core problem is at the feet of the energy rates in Ontario.
Minister Sousa speaking at lunch hour to business people, and he, from what I understand, he might say that we actually are expecting to go further than our targets for debt reduction for this year. Do you believe that?
Well, look, that you're at the core of today. There's nothing that the Liberals have told us in the last 12 months that we believe. Last year, about this time, we stood here and presented a chart to you that showed everybody the once secret internal documents that showed they made up a deficit number of $24.7 billion. They know they wanted to get to zero by 2017-18, drew a straight line up, filled the lines in, and that was going to be the deficit projections. They have nothing to do with reality. It was made up, and in their own language, these numbers are simply made up to achieve a goal of zero. So when you start with made up numbers and you present the continuation of made up numbers every year, how can you believe that? So, you know, are you going to come lower than $12.5 billion? Why would they not? It's a made-up number to start with. Artificially high, in their own language. It was artificially high to start with to achieve a zero in 2017-18. So when you start with fake numbers, it's there can be no credibility. Look at, we saw it just a few months ago, 4 months after their budget, their revenue projections were off by $500 million. How could you be $500 million off in just 4 months? Nothing, they tell us, is believable.
The government appears to be sort of mulling the sale of assets such as Hydro One. Your party in the past has sort of welcomed some form of privatization of government assets. Do you think this is an appropriate way to balance the books?
It's not an appropriate way to balance the books, but that's not to say that it's not an appropriate thing to target, the sale of assets. What they're doing is egregious. they're burning the furniture to heat the house. What happens next year when you don't have those assets to sell? So you're not fixing the core, the fundamental structural problem that you have of high spending. You're artificially putting a Band-Aid on it by selling something off. But next year, if you don't have an asset to sell, you're still stuck with the high expenses. You've got to get at the root of the problem. If you're going to sell assets, one-time sale, you allow that for the one-time use of an expenditure. It would be a healthy option to fill the reserves that they've been depleting, like they did last year. 300 million out of the reserves in the fall, $1 billion out of the reserves to drop the deficit last year. That, you need to shore up our reserves.
More questions. Do you think it's a good idea to sell off Hydro One or parts of Hydro?
Well, I think it's going to be a good idea to have a discussion about that, certainly. I have no objection to maximizing the use of assets. I really don't have any objection to that at all. It's what you do with the money and what they're planning to do that I object to. You can't balance the budget on a one-time sale. That's just fake math.
Tories did it with 407.
For the education part, do you predict that there's more cutting in education because the province, they're going to closing schools?
Well, again, it's hard to get around what the minister said. We heard only a month or so ago they talked about a $400 million or $500 million cut to the education budget. So we'll be eager to see what's in this budget. I can't forecast what they're going to do at all.
Do you think Ontario is teetering on a recession here?
I don't think it's recessionary. I think there's a chance for us to fix this by cutting our spending. We're getting all the bells ringing here by everybody. You need to show the business community that you're serious about cutting your spending, or they're going to do it for you. We have 2,700 fewer businesses in Ontario last year than the year before. 2,700 voted with their feet by leaving Ontario. That's an astounding number. And I'm not just talking about Heinz and Wrigley's and General Mills and Caterpillar and Kellogg's. Those are big ones that everybody's familiar with. But 2,700 businesses left.
Seems to be being laid for a very substantial investment in GM, Oshawa GM, to keep it here. Do you have any thoughts on what the government should be thinking at this time, as they're likely being asked for, who knows, hundreds of millions?
It'll depend on what the ask eventually is. When I was running for leader, I'll tell you what I said then. I am absolutely against corporate welfare, but in favor of sectoral investments. There's some sectors that you just have to invest in to protect Ontario's role in that. And the automotive sector is a sector that should have money available equally to all partners. I've always believed in that. To me, that's very different than corporate welfare, where you pay somebody to create a job in a sector that is competing down the street with another one. There's a vast difference between the two of them. But again, we shouldn't have to be paying people to create jobs in Ontario. If you correct the abysmal job we've done on hydro rates, we've tripled them in 11 years. We have the highest payroll taxes. There's other fundamentals that are wrong that the business community is looking for them to change. They're the ones who are going to create the jobs, not the government.
Can you be clear though? Like, is there a line for you on GM? I don't know whether your line is no money without some specific job commitment or.
Well, again, I would always be interested in investing in a sector. If it's the automotive sector, and that's one, when you talk about the multiplier effect, a lot of these other economic development ones have a multiplier effect that I don't believe in. The automotive sector truly does have a multiplier of 9 because the companies do not make all their components. We know that for a fact. So we know all of the other businesses that are feeders. They are. This becomes a very, very large industry. So the automotive sector is one that I would see the government being able to actually make an investment in job creation. In job creation.
With that investment, are you talking shares again, like a similar sort of bailout, like what happened in?
It can be a long way off, but I would think that any government should be open to discussions of protecting a sector, especially one that has a multiplier of 9.
Vic, it seems to me that your party's leadership campaign has become sort of spectacularly divisive among itself. I mean, there's been some rather bitter emails. If Patrick Brown wins the leadership, will you be staying on as MPP?
Oh, I can't speak for all the other MPPs, but I know that I've made a commitment in my community not only to finish this term, but I've already committed to running again in 2018. I think that it's important. We all have an important role to play, whether my role is as the northernmost member of our party or as finance critic, which I think is a critical role to continue to let the people of Ontario know the true state of our economy. I look forward to the next my next 7 years for sure.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.